Count them.
Seriously, count them. Because someone actually did. A fan sat down, went back through years of footage, through arguments, smiles, staged family meetings, awkward silences, and moments that were never meant to be rewatched this closely, and they counted every single time Kody Brown said one word. Family. Not 10 times. Not 50. Hundreds. Hundreds of times across nearly 2 decades of television. Family was his introduction.
His defense.
His identity. His shield when things went wrong. His explanation when nothing made sense. His justification when people got hurt. His legacy pitch. His closing argument. Family wasn't just a word he used. It was the word he built his entire life around. And yet, somehow, the youngest daughter growing up inside that life, truly Brown, experienced something that looked nothing like it. And that contradiction right there, that gap between what was said and what was actually lived, that's the real story. Because it's easy to watch this family and get distracted by the obvious drama. The marriages falling apart, the arguments between the wives, the tension that slowly turned into distance and then into something much harder to repair. But if you look closely, really closely, there's a quieter story running underneath all of it. A smaller figure in the background. A child who didn't get confessionals, didn't dominate scenes, didn't demand attention, but saw everything. And understood more than anyone realized. Truly Brown grew up in a house full of the word family, but not the reality of it. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that most people miss when they talk about Kody Brown. He didn't hate his family. He wasn't sitting there plotting how to hurt his kids or destroy his relationships. That's not what makes this story complicated. What makes it complicated, and honestly more unsettling, is that he believed in what he was doing. Completely. He believed in family the way some people believe in destiny. In purpose. In something bigger than themselves. He believed in the idea of it so deeply that somewhere along the way, the actual people inside that idea started to matter less than the idea itself. And that's where everything starts to break. Because you can't hug an idea. You can't call an idea when you're scared. You can't sit across from an idea at the end of a long day and feel seen. And Truly didn't grow up with an idea. She grew up needing a father. So let's go back. Past the arguments, past the fractures, past the version of this family that most people remember. Back to the beginning. And not the polished version. Not the nostalgic version people like to look back on and say, it wasn't always this bad. The real beginning. When cameras first entered their lives, there was something there. You could see it. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was real in a way that made people believe in it. For women navigating something incredibly complicated, raising children together, sharing responsibilities, building something unconventional but functional enough to hold together. There were moments, genuine ones, where it felt like it worked. Kids moving between homes, laughter spilling into shared spaces, a kind of community that most families don't experience. And into that world, Truly was born. She came into a system that, on paper, should have given her everything. More parents, more siblings, more support, more connection. If you measured it structurally, she should have been one of the most surrounded children imaginable. But here's where the story quietly shifts. Because what something looks like from the outside and what it feels like on the inside are not the same thing. Not even close. And Truly's childhood becomes the clearest example of that difference. Because the issue was never just the structure itself. It wasn't about plural marriage in the abstract sense. That's too easy, too surface level, too convenient. The real issue was what happened when that structure stopped being flexible and started becoming something rigid. Something that couldn't be questioned. Something that couldn't be adjusted. Something that had to be defended at all costs. Because when you take a family and turn it into something sacred, something untouchable, you create a situation where problems don't get solved. They get justified. They get explained away. They get buried under language that sounds meaningful, but doesn't actually change anything. And that's exactly what happened here. Every time something cracked, it wasn't treated like a human issue. It became something bigger, something spiritual, something tied to purpose, to legacy, to belief. And once that happens, you stop asking, how do we fix this? You start asking, how do we protect this? And those are two completely different questions. Kody didn't respond to problems by stepping closer to the people in front of him. He responded by stepping deeper into the idea he believed in. And from a distance, that can look like conviction. But up close, especially for a child, it feels like absence. Because while he was defending the concept of family, Truly was living inside the reality of it. And those two things didn't match. You can see it most clearly in the moments that were supposed to bring everyone together. The family meetings. They happened again and again throughout the years. Everyone's sitting in one place. Cameras rolling. Kody at the center, speaking like a leader, like someone guiding something important. And on the surface, it looked like unity, like communication, like structure. But if you pay attention to what was actually being discussed, something becomes very obvious. The conversations weren't about the children. Not really. They were about logistics, about conflict between adults, about decisions that had already been made or were about to be made, without real input from the people most affected by them. The kids were there, physically present, but emotionally, they weren't the focus. And Truly sat in those rooms over and over again, listening, watching, learning something no child should have to learn that early. That being present doesn't mean being prioritized. That being included doesn't mean being heard. And that the word family can be used constantly without actually meaning what it's supposed to mean. And then came the decision that would change everything. The move. Because if there's one moment where the gap between Kody's words and his actions becomes impossible to ignore, it's this one. Truly was still very young. At an age where your world is small, but it's everything. Your friends, your routines, the places you recognize, the feeling of knowing where you belong. And all of that was taken apart, not because she chose it, not because she understood it, but because it fit into a larger vision, a bigger plan, something that sounded important when explained, but didn't feel right when lived. And that's the part people don't sit with long enough. Because for Kody, it was about the future. For Truly, it was about her present. And those two timelines didn't align. One was hypothetical, the other was happening in real time. And when the dust settled, when the move was complete, when the promises attached to it started to fade, something became clear. The sacrifice was real, but the outcome? It wasn't. The vision didn't materialize the way it was supposed to. The stability that was promised didn't replace what was lost. And for a child, that leaves a mark. Because kids don't measure decisions in long-term strategy. They measure them in how their life feels day to day. And Truly's life became something quieter, more observant, more internal. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room. She didn't demand attention. She didn't create moments that forced people to stop and look at her. But that doesn't mean nothing was happening. It means everything was happening, just not in a way that was easy to see. Because when a child realizes slowly over time that the environment around them isn't going to adjust for their needs, they adjust themselves. And that adjustment becomes part of who they are. Not because they want it to be, but because it has to be. And that's where Truly's story really begins. Not in the chaos, not in the arguments, but in the quiet space where a child starts to understand something without anyone ever saying it out loud. That the word family can be everywhere, and still feel like it's missing exactly where it matters most. And this is where things stop being just uncomfortable and start becoming something you can't ignore anymore. Because once you see the pattern, you start noticing it everywhere. Not in the loud moments, the arguments, the confrontations, the scenes that get clipped and shared and debated, but in the quieter ones. The in-between spaces. The background moments that were never meant to carry the weight they actually do. That's where Truly's story lives. Not in what was said, but in what wasn't. Because while the adults were busy navigating their own conflicts, their own frustrations, their own versions of what the family was supposed to be, Truly was growing up inside all of it. And children don't need things explained to understand them. They feel them. They absorb them. They build their understanding of the world based on patterns, not speeches. And the pattern here was consistent. Attention went where the tension was. Energy went where the conflict lived. And what was left over was what the children received. Now think about that from a child's perspective. You're in a room full of people. Your parent is there, technically present, but their focus is somewhere else. Their attention is pulled towards something bigger, louder, more urgent. You learn very quickly what gets noticed and what doesn't. You learn what kind of behavior creates a reaction and what kind of behavior disappears into the background. And if you're a child like truly observant, thoughtful, not naturally disruptive, you don't fight for attention. You adapt. You become easier, quieter, less demanding, not because you don't need anything, but because you've learned that needing things doesn't change the outcome. That's not personality. That's strategy. And the hardest part about that kind of strategy is that from the outside, it looks like strength. It looks like independence. It looks like a child who is so mature, so easy, so low maintenance. And adults love to praise that. They see a child who isn't causing problems and they assume everything is fine. But what they're actually seeing is a child who stopped expecting their needs to be met. And that's a very different thing. Because real independence comes from support. This kind of independence comes from absence. And the difference between those two things is everything. You can actually see the shift happen over time. Earlier on, Truly is just a kid. Present, curious, existing within the flow of a big family. But as the years go on, there's a subtle change. She becomes more watchful, more contained, less reactive to the chaos around her. And that might sound like growth. But in this context, it's adaptation. Because while all of this is happening, something else is unfolding in real time right in front of her. Her older siblings are leaving. Not all at once. Not dramatically, at least not always. But steadily. One by one, they start creating distance. And that matters. Because siblings aren't just siblings in a family like this. They're reference points. They're examples of what's possible. They're proof of what happens when you grow up and have the ability to make your own choices. And what Truly saw over and over again was people choosing to step away, choosing space, choosing distance from the same father she was still living with. Now imagine being young enough that you don't have that option yet. Old enough to understand what's happening, but not old enough to do anything about it. You're still there, still sitting at the table, still part of the structure that everyone else is quietly, or not so quietly, stepping away from. That creates a very specific kind of awareness, because you're watching the story play out in front of you while still being inside it. And at the same time, the person at the center of all of this, Kody, is changing too. Or maybe not changing, maybe just becoming more of who he already was. Because as the family starts to fracture, his focus doesn't shift toward repair in the way you might expect. It shifts toward justification, toward explanation, toward a narrative where he isn't the cause of what's happening, but the one being affected by it. And this is where the dynamic becomes even more complicated. Because there's a difference between someone who fails and takes responsibility, and someone who fails and reframes the failure in a way that protects their self-image. Kody starts telling a different story. A story where he is the one being disrespected, the one being misunderstood, the one whose vision is being rejected by people who just don't see it the way he does. And that kind of narrative does something very specific inside a family. It shifts the weight. It takes the focus off of what people are experiencing and places it onto how one person feels about those experiences. And again, adults can argue with that. Adults can push back. Adults can leave. But children? They don't argue with narratives. They live inside them. So Truly is growing up in a space where the reality she's experiencing and the story being told about that reality don't match. And when that happens consistently, something starts to form. A quiet understanding. A kind of internal clarity that doesn't need to be spoken out loud. Because it's felt. Repeatedly. In small moments. In patterns. In absence. And this is where the phrase that's been floating around for years, almost like a theory, stops being theoretical. That Kody didn't love his family, he loved the idea of it. At this point, it's not something you have to debate. It's something you can observe. Because loving an idea looks very different from loving a person. Loving an idea is big. It's expressive. It's full of language. Words like legacy, purpose, unity, vision. It sounds powerful, convincing even. But loving a person? That's specific. It's quiet. It shows up in small, consistent ways. It's being there when nothing important is happening. It's paying attention when there's no audience. It's noticing things that don't get talked about. And that's the kind of love truly needed. Not the speeches, not the declarations, not the repeated use of the word family. She needed presence, consistency, attention that wasn't divided across a system too large to sustain it. And the absence of that shaped her in ways that don't always show up immediately. Because the effects of this kind of childhood don't always look dramatic. They don't always create explosive moments. Sometimes they create something much quieter. A person who learns to rely on themselves. A person who doesn't ask for much. A person who becomes incredibly capable incredibly early. And again, that gets praised. People look at that and say, she's so strong. She's so independent. But strength that develops from necessity carries a different weight than strength that develops from support. And here's where it becomes even more important to be precise. Because there's a pattern, not just in this family, but in a lot of families, where a parent looks at a child who adapted to their absence and interprets that adaptation as something they provided, as if the outcome justifies the process, as if the child turned out fine. So whatever happened along the way must not have been that bad. But that skips over something critical, the cost. Because yes, truly became self-sufficient. Yes, she became observant, capable, emotionally aware. But the question isn't just what she became. It's what she had to give up to become that. What needs went unmet. What moments passed without the kind of attention that changes how a child sees themselves. Because those things don't disappear. They don't just fade away because someone learns how to function without them. They get internalized. They become part of the blueprint. And that blueprint follows you. Into relationships. Into adulthood. Into the way you understand connection, presence, and what it means to be chosen by someone. And that word, chosen, is important here. Because at its core, that's what this entire story comes down to. Not structure. Not belief. Not even family as a concept. Choice. Who gets chosen consistently when it actually matters. Not in big speeches. Not in public declarations. But in ordinary moments. In the quiet decisions no one sees. And for truly, those choices didn't always land where they needed to. And she noticed. Even if she never said it out loud. Even if she never made it a storyline. Even if she never turned it into something dramatic or confrontational. Because not all understanding is loud. Some of it is incredibly quiet, but no less real. And as the years go on, as the family continues to shift, to separate, to redefine itself in ways that look nothing like what was originally promised, truly is still there, still watching, still learning, still building her understanding of what all of this means. Not the version that gets explained, but the version that gets lived. And that distinction? That's where everything changes. Because once you learn the difference between what people say and what they actually do, you don't forget it. And this is the part of the story where everything that was promised collides with everything that actually happened. Because for years, over and over again, Kody talked about one thing almost as much as he talked about family. Legacy. Not just a future. Not just raising kids. Something bigger than that. Something that would last. Something his children and their children would look back on and say, this mattered, this meant something, this was worth it. He spoke about it like he was building something permanent. Something that would outlive the arguments, outlast the struggles, rise above the imperfections. A legacy. But here's the problem with building something that's supposed to last forever. It has to actually work in the present. And slowly, piece by piece, that started to fall apart. Not all at once. Not in one dramatic moment. But in a series of fractures that kept getting wider. Cracks that weren't repaired, just explained. Tension that wasn't resolved, just reframed. Until eventually, the gap between what was being said and what was being lived became impossible to ignore. And the thing about legacy is, it doesn't come from intention. It comes from outcome. You don't get remembered for what you meant to build. You get remembered for what you actually created. And what Kody created is complicated. Because when you step back and look at it, not through the lens of belief, not through the lens of what it was supposed to be, but through the lens of what it became, you see something very different. You see relationships that didn't hold. You see distance where there was supposed to be unity. You see children who grew up and, in many cases, chose space over closeness. And that doesn't happen randomly. That happens when patterns repeat long enough that they stop feeling temporary and start feeling permanent.
And truly?
She was still in the middle of that when it was happening. Still young enough to be shaped by it. Still present while everything else was shifting around her. Not yet. She had to stay. She had to experience the slow unraveling in real time. Watch the tone change. Watch the energy shift. Watch the connections weaken. And maybe the hardest part of all, watch the person who talked the most about family become less and less present within it. Not physically always, but emotionally. And that kind of absence is harder to explain, because it's not obvious. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't look like someone leaving. It looks like someone being there but not really being there. And for a child, that creates confusion before it creates clarity. Because you don't immediately understand what you're feeling. You just know something is off. Something is missing. Something isn't lining up the way it should. And over time, that confusion turns into understanding. Not the kind that gets spoken out loud. The kind that settles in quietly. The kind that shows up in how you respond to people. In how much you expect from them. In how much you don't. And by the time the family reaches its later stages, by the time everything that was once held together starts to fully separate, truly isn't reacting the way you might expect a child to react. She's not dramatic. She's not confrontational. She's not trying to pull things back together. She's steady, observant,
contained.
And that might look like she's unaffected, but it's actually the opposite. It's what happens when someone has been processing something for a long time. Quietly, internally, without needing to announce it. Because here's something people don't always realize. The loudest reactions usually come from people who are just starting to understand what's happening. The quiet ones, they often come from people who already understand, who have been watching long enough that nothing surprises them anymore. And that's what makes Truly's presence in those later moments so significant. Because she's not discovering the reality. She's already lived it. And while all of this is unfolding, Kody's narrative becomes more defined, more rigid, more centered on how he is being affected by everything. The frustration, the feeling of being disrespected, the sense that things are not going the way they were supposed to. And again, those feelings might be real, but they're not the whole picture. Because when you're at the center of something, your experience isn't the only one that matters. And that's where the disconnect deepens. Because while he's focused on what he's losing, the people around him are living with what they've already lost. And that difference in perspective, it changes everything. Because one side is trying to preserve something that no longer exists, and the other side has already accepted that it's gone, and is trying to figure out what comes next. And Truly is right there in between those two realities. Old enough to see what's happening, young enough to still be shaped by it. And that combination creates something very specific. A kind of emotional awareness that doesn't need to be taught. It comes from experience, from observation, from living in an environment where words and actions don't always match. And this is where the idea of legacy becomes almost ironic. Because the thing Kody talked about building for years, it does exist, just not in the way he imagined. Because legacy isn't what you say it will be. It's what people carry with them when everything is over. It's what they remember, what they felt, what stayed with them. And those things don't come from speeches. They come from moments, from consistency, from presence, or the absence of it. And for Truly, the legacy she's carrying isn't about plural marriage as a concept. It's not about the structure. It's not about the belief system. It's about something much more personal, much more specific. It's about what it felt like to grow up in a space where the word family was everywhere, but didn't always show up in the ways that mattered most. And that kind of experience doesn't just disappear. It shapes how you see everything that comes after, how you define connection, how you understand love, how you decide what you will and won't accept in your own life. And that's where the story starts to turn. Because as much as this is about what happened, it's also about what happens next. Because Truly isn't just part of the story. She's moving beyond it, growing into someone who gets to make her own choices, who gets to define family for herself, not based on what was said, but based on what she actually experienced. And that matters, because people who grow up with this kind of clarity, this understanding of the difference between words and reality, they don't usually repeat the same patterns. Not exactly. They adjust. They refine. They build something different. Not out of rebellion, but out of awareness. Because once you've felt the gap between what something is supposed to be and what it actually is, you don't chase the idea anymore. You look for the real thing. And the real thing is simpler than everything she grew up around. It's not built on big declarations. It's not framed as something extraordinary. It doesn't need to be defended constantly. It just works, quietly,
Consistently.
in ways that don't require explanation. And that's something Truly didn't fully have. But it's something she now understands the value of better than most people ever will. And that understanding, that's what she carries forward. Not the structure, not the narrative, not the version of the story that was told on camera, but the truth of what it felt like to live inside it. And that truth is what shapes what comes next. And this is where everything comes full circle in a way that's a lot quieter than you'd expect, but hits a lot harder. Because after all the years, all the words, all the explanations, all the defenses, it comes down to something incredibly simple. A question that doesn't need 18 seasons to answer, but somehow took all of them to fully reveal. What is the difference between loving someone and loving the idea of them? Because that's it. That's the entire architecture of this story. Not plural marriage, not television, not even the conflicts that kept people watching, just that one distinction. And once you see it, you start seeing it everywhere. Because loving someone, the real version of them, the one standing in front of you, the one who has needs and moods and moments that don't fit neatly into a vision, that kind of love is specific. It's inconvenient sometimes. It asks things of you. It requires presence when there's nothing to gain from it. It shows up on ordinary days, in quiet moments, when no one is watching and there's nothing to prove. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be repeated over and over again. It just exists consistently. But loving the idea of someone, that's different. That's clean. That's controllable. That fits into a narrative. It allows you to talk about love without always having to practice it in the moments where it's hardest. And that's the difference Truly grew up inside. Not in theory, not as an abstract concept, but as a daily reality. Because she didn't need to analyze it to understand it. She felt it in the moments where attention went somewhere else. In the times where presence wasn't there when it mattered. In the quiet realization that being part of something didn't always mean being chosen within it. And that kind of understanding doesn't disappear. It doesn't fade with time. It becomes part of how you move through the world. Part of how you decide who gets access to you. Part of how you define what love actually looks like. And here's the part that changes the entire tone of the story, because up until now, it's been about what was missing. But this isn't just a story about loss. It's a story about clarity. Because people who grow up in environments where there's a gap between words and reality develop something most people don't get until much later in life. They develop precision. They can tell the difference between someone saying the right thing and someone doing the right thing. They can feel when something is off even if it looks perfect on the surface. And that changes everything about how they build their own lives. Because they don't chase appearances. They don't get distracted by big promises. They don't confuse intensity with consistency. They look for what's real, what shows up, what stays. And if you think about it, that might be the most unexpected outcome of all of this. Because the environment that didn't give Truly what she needed also gave her the ability to recognize it when she sees it. And that means something. That means the story doesn't end where it started. It shifts. It evolves. It becomes something new. Because Truly isn't just the youngest child in a complicated family. She's someone who is now in a position to define things for herself. To decide what family means without needing to defend it. Without needing to turn it into something bigger than it is. Without needing to repeat the word over and over again to make it feel real. She gets to build something quieter. Something more intentional. Something that doesn't rely on structure to hold it together, because it's held together by presence. And if you really sit with that, it changes how you see everything that came before. Because all those conversations about legacy, they weren't wrong. They were just incomplete. Because legacy isn't what you say you're leaving behind. It's what people carry with them when they walk away. It's the lessons they keep, the patterns they repeat or refuse to repeat, the standards they set for their own lives based on what they experienced. And in that sense, the legacy is still being written, not by the person who tried to define it, but by the people who lived inside it. And Truly is one of those people. Maybe the most important one, because she saw the ending from the inside while still being shaped by it. She didn't just hear the word family. She experienced the distance between that word and its reality. And now she carries that understanding forward into every decision, every relationship, every moment where she gets to choose something different. And that's where this story becomes something bigger than just one family. Because if you're really honest with yourself, most people have felt some version of this. Maybe not on camera, maybe not in a family this large or this complicated. But the feeling? It's familiar. Loving someone who doesn't show up the way they say they will. Being part of something that looks right from the outside but feels different on the inside. Trying to make sense of the gap between what you're told and what you actually experience. And that's why this story stays with people. Because it names something. Something a lot of people don't always have the words for. The difference between being included and being valued. Between being around and being seen. Between hearing family and actually feeling it. And maybe that's the real reason this matters. Not just because of what happened, but because of what it helps people recognize in their own lives. Because once you can see that difference clearly, you start making different choices. You start expecting different things. You stop accepting words without presence. You stop confusing ideas with reality. And you start building something that actually feels the way it's supposed to. And that's something truly deserved from the beginning. Not eventually. Not after everything fell apart. From the start, she deserved a version of family that didn't need to be explained, didn't need to be defended, didn't need to be repeated over and over again to feel real. She deserved the kind of presence that makes the word unnecessary. And maybe that's the final truth here, the simplest one, the one that was there the entire time. If you have to keep saying it, if you have to keep explaining it, if you have to keep convincing people it's real, there's a chance it isn't showing up where it matters most. Because real family, real love, real presence, it doesn't need a speech. It doesn't need a defense. It doesn't need to be counted. It's just there.
Consistently.
Quietly. Without needing to prove itself. And that's the thing Truly Brown grew up without, while hearing about it more than anyone else in the room. And now the question isn't what happened. We've seen that. The question is what comes next. What does she build from it? What does she keep? What does she leave behind? Because that's where the real ending is. Not in what was said, but in what she chooses. So, I want to know what you think. Not just about the big moments, the moves, the arguments, the decisions everyone talks about, but the small ones, the quiet ones, the ones that didn't make headlines but probably mattered the most. What moment do you think stayed with her? What scene, what shift, what decision do you think she'll carry the longest? Because sometimes the most important parts of a story are the ones that happen in the background. And this community sees those better than most. So say what you really think. And if this made you see things differently, share it with someone who needs that clarity. Because there are people out there right now trying to understand something they can feel, but can't quite explain. And sometimes all it takes is hearing it said out loud to finally recognize it. And if you're not already here, stay close. Because next time, we're going even deeper into a part of this story that almost nobody questions, but should. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it.